Hello everybody. Uh, Today I am going to talk about a certain idea of how research can actually progress in the discipline of cultural studies and critical theory, the two branches of what comes to be called literary and cultural theory in the field of humanities and social sciences. Now, of course, we look at it from a literary perspective because we are students of literature. And in order to do that, I mean, when we talk about it as being something that, as something that we are going to look at from the point of view of literature, what I mean by that is I am going to be drawing examples from certain literary texts in order to be able to talk about how a certain research direction, a research question can develop from an existing body of knowledge, which does not strictly have to do with literature, does not strictly deal with literature, but it deals with something which is an aspect of what we call critical theory in the humanities and social sciences. So, in order to do that, let me first explicate the fact that I am going to be talking about a topic as basic as animal-human interactions, and I'm going to be I'm going to be illustrating to you how this animal-human interactions has actually undergone various changes across time in research, so that a new question can actually develop in a field as simple as animal human studies, right, or broadly called animal studies in the discipline of humanities. My first proposition is the fact that I'm going to be talking about two assumptions first, and from these two assumptions we are going to arrive at the third assumption, or maybe a third way of looking at animal-human interaction, which is not to be found in the first two presumptions. So the third presumption that I shall be talking about actually constitutes the new research question, right? And while doing that, I'm not going to be taking names as such, because this is going to be a general video for those who are interested in how research can, those who are interested in research and want to understand how research methodology progresses. That is why I'm not going to be taking names, but for general information, it must be made clear that the third proposition that I'm going to be talking about, the third proposition, which is basically a kind of a question to the first and the second, is has to be attributed to the work of a very famous French philosopher by the name of Jacques Derrida, whom we associate with the theory of deconstruction and to a certain extent to a certain strand of post-structuralist theory. Okay, so the first presumption is that when we talk about animal-human interactions, one of the first ways of looking at it, perhaps one of the most basic ways of looking at the question of animal studies from an anthropocentric perspective, which is from the perspective of the human eye, one of the first assumptions is that since human beings can make sense of the world around them, which has been the defining feature of humanism since the Renaissance, and this in fact came to be called humanism as such, because it defines the human being as the standard for judging the future of everything that the human being sees around him. So he becomes the center of the universe, in a sense, in a reversal of the theocratic system where God is at the center of the universe, which mainly began with the development of the secular sciences and learning in the early modern period. So one of the ways in which humanism affects the field of animal studies is by the presumption that since humans can best define, right, the attitudes towards the planet, it is prerogative of the human being itself, or human being himself, to define how he is going to look at the question of the animal. So the human beings themselves can preserve, if it is from the perspective of conservation, then this theory holds that human beings themselves can chalk out a perspective that best suits the animal condition that is best suitable to the interests of the animal. So the animal in this sense gets represented by what is presumed to be the non-animal. And the non-animal is basically someone who is endowed with that faculty of reasoning, logic, understanding, everything that seems to be denied, and most importantly language for communication, right, which is kind of held to be denied to the non-human animal other. So that is the first proposition, that the human beings themselves can create a condition where animals can continue to thrive and thrive best. Okay. The second proposition that follows from the humanist understanding is the question of empathy. So if the human being can best define, right, the standards of judging the planet, standards for judging the environment, and the standards for judging the non-human, if it is the human being who can best define this, then it is not simply from the perspective of agency or not simply from the perspective of action that he gets to define it. The human being can also determine the standards with which the animal is going to be looked at from the perspective of empathy, feeling like the animal. So what follows from here is that in literary perspectives, this became very important, because in literature you will come across examples, many examples. I can give you ample examples from short stories. Immediately I can think of one by H.E. Bates, the very famous British writer, who was also an aircraft pilot, by the way. H.E. Bates, who wrote a short story called The Ox, which also forms a part of many university syllabi today. And those who have read the story will know that this basically talks about a woman. The story talks about a woman coming from a lower class background, who in fact has to endure a lot of hardships in maintaining her family, in keeping her family together, right? So this way of judging, right, this is a way of sympathetically looking at the fact that, you know, there are certain people, there are certain identities who are almost identical to each other. Say for example, the lower class woman coming from a lower social background or economic background is held to be someone almost equivalent to the animal in terms of the way she is treated. Okay, there's also a short story by Mahashwata Devi in Bengali called Stanodayini, or the breast giver, where a woman who serves as a breast giver, a kind of breastfeeder to children in a very affluent zamindari household in Bengal, is looked upon in the same light. Okay, so here you might say, well, this idea of empathy or this idea of sympathy seems to be very productive in the sense that it raises your consciousness, it lets you yourself be conscious of what kind of power dynamics are being played in society, right? But the fault line, to put it very, very briefly, the fault line of such an understanding, especially the humanist understanding, is that somewhere or the other, in spite of talking about, actions, feelings that seem to be quote unquote progressive, that seem to be quote unquote empathetic, the question of the human being still lies at the center of that discourse. It is the human being who can do it. Even it is the human being who can create better conditions. It is the human being who is endowed with the feeling of empathy, because he is no longer in this animal kingdom. He is no longer in the law of the jungle. And most importantly, when it comes to the equation of these identities, such as the lower class woman, animal, when it comes to the equation of these identities, even here there is some politics going on. And that anthropomorphic politics, man-centered politics, is located in the fact that somehow or the other it makes you more sympathetic, not to the animal to whom it is being compared, but to the person who is being compared to the animal. So the primacy of the man or the primacy of the human still reigns supreme in this discourse. We have not been able to still conceptually move out of the primacy of the anthropos, which in Greek means human, right? The third perspective, and this is the research question that Derrida put forward in terms of the animal-human interaction, the third question is, The third presumption or the third point of view is that we should not be looking at the animal in terms of how we are equal to it. In other words, we should not be looking at the animal in terms of what I am capable of and what he is or what it is capable of. Say for example, when I am talking about the ox as a signifier for the working class woman who's having to struggle very hard, right? Or I'm talking about the bull as symbolic of Stanadaini in Mahashwata Devi's story, the breast giver in Mahashwata Devi's story. When I'm talking about these examples, I am including a certain possibility. What is that possibility? It is the possibility of making a relationship between both subjects who endure hardship, who claim hardship, okay, who feel pain, okay. So that feeling of pain seems to be putting both these subjects together. What Derrida tells us is that if we were to change that perspective a little bit, okay, and we were to look at it this way, that both these subjects are basically identical simply because of the fact both of them cannot do something, not in terms of what they are capable of. They should be identical in terms of what they are not capable of, which is precisely none of these two subjects, either the ox or the protagonist of H.E. Bates' story, the working class woman, neither of these two subjects can bear pain. Which means what they cannot do is they cannot endure pain. They cannot endure suffering. This becomes a very unique way of looking at this question of animal-human relationship or interaction, because not only does it bring a fresh perspective to the second presumption that I was talking about, but what it actually does is it hits at the root of the first presumption as well, which is the humanist presumption. The moment I talk about humanism as something that defines human capacity, I am already excluding from the point of view of my discussion the fact that the humans are also not capable of doing something. And this incapability has never featured in the discourse of humanism ever since the Renaissance. We have come to know about this incapability in recent times. Okay, one of the most recent incidents being COVID-19. The fact that we were not able to even protect ourselves. Even the first world economies were finding it difficult to tackle this problem. So the third position, it defines this relationship in a way which is destructive to humanism as well. Because humanism lies at the root, you see, humanism itself lay at the root of all problems, ecological problems centering around the animal today. Because it was humanism, that idea of making space for the human, that led to the clearing of forests, you see. So when I'm bringing that same perspective into my discussion of what makes the animal and the human alike, okay, when I'm bringing that same perspective into my discussion, I am not curing the problem for the root, I am just curing the symptom. So this is what brings a fresh perspective and becomes a part of basic research, because it introduces a new way, a new theory regarding the animal-human interaction. Therefore, this becomes a fresh research question because it looks at what was not addressed either in the second presumption or in the first presumption. It thus creates a new theory and invites us to apply this in our investigation of further literary texts. Thank you so much.